is going to be rebroadcast on the FSRC, BSRT Florida Working Group website and a number of social media sites. So I just want everybody to realize that you're in a very public meeting here, that transparency is a core value of this working group, that we have nothing to hide here. And this is, again, going to be a very public meeting. I'd like to take a minute to try to introduce everybody. It's always hard in a virtual meeting because everybody wants to blurt out at once. So if you guys don't mind, I'll go around the room, sort of introduce everybody. My memory is getting to a point where I could probably hide my own Easter eggs. So if I forget anybody or forget what company you're with, please don't hesitate to correct me. So we have on the call today, we have Glenn Milano. He is the current president of the FSRC. He is a manager at Ascension. Is that right, Glenn?
Yeah, I'm an inpatient care director, so I'm not directly over a respiratory therapy department at Ascension St. Vincent's.
Okay. We have Tom Seeley from Shands. We have Tom Berlin from Advent Health. We have Jose Morales, who is a bedside clinician at Miami Barstow, who also works as a CI for Miami-Dade College. We have Dr. Tom Furman, medical director of the FSRC. We have Dr. Tony Lamoglia joining us. Dan Ayers from Baycare St. Joseph. Shannon Walsh. Shannon, help me out. Ascension, I always get this one wrong.
In the bathroom. Go. In her room. Look in her room.
Yeah, I am the manager of respiratory services for Ascension, two of our campuses here in Jacksonville.
Very good. Thanks, Shannon, and welcome. We have Karen Shenton from Valencia College. We have Memi Privat, who is a student at, I believe, Daytona State. Do I have that right, Remy?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Nancy Latimer, who's the program director for Palm Beach State. We have Kimber Shippey, who is a manager for Baycare. We have Brooke Chitty, who's manager at HCA Lake City Hospital. We have Crystal Lemelin from Seminole State in Altamonte Springs. We have Misty Carlson, who's the DCE for Daytona State. We have Kathy Rosansky, who is with Baptist Medical Center. We have Mark Pellman, who's director at Sarasota Memorial Hospital. We have Michelle Lee, who is the program director for Miami-Dade College. We have Jean McAgay, who's DCE at St. Petersburg College. We have Jarek Rivera, who has the misfortune of being a student in our program here at SBC. And we have Leah Carlson, who is, correct me if I'm wrong, a dean at Santa Fe State, correct?
Santa Fe College, yes.
Okay, very good. Is there anybody I forgot? Excellent. Hey, anybody whose name I mispronounced? Okay, not too bad for an old guy. All right. So let me just move on with a couple of pieces of housekeeping. One is we're going to have a hard stop at an hour. So the meeting will end at 1 o'clock. There are several people who are able to keep up with this meeting only through recordings. And keeping the recordings to an hour or under just makes that more manageable. It also makes for more manageable and more readily understood meeting minutes. In the interest of the fact that we are producing a recording, when you speak, please feel free to state your name for the recording. The group has a pretty good distribution geographically. However, students and bedside clinicians are represented. So I would ask that you please spread the word to your team and to your students. One term that got kicked around a fair amount at the last meeting, and for those of us that might not be able to attend these meetings in person, I want to make sure it gets clarified. And that's the term, what is grandfather? So as we talk about things like, the BSRT entry level, which at this time is is only a discussion. When we say grandfathering, we're making the point that in order to maintain your license, you would not have to up your educational level to maintain your license. Now, so for example, if somebody were working as an AS level RT, had graduated from a 2-year program, and the BSRT, the 4-year program, became the new standard, no AS level RT would be forced to become a BSRT. However, the point should be made that employers could require the new degree, even if the new degree isn't mandated by the state, similar to what you had with CRTs, that even though the state still allows CRTs, in a pre-pandemic world in particular, many employers still require the RRT. And I hope that better clarifies the term grandfathering.
And I just wanted to make a point, because when this came up in another survey we had done, there was a group that was, believe it or not, it needed to be clarified that this doesn't mean that we're grandfathering them and giving them a bachelor's degree either.
Right. Excellent point, Dan. Excellent point. Thanks for clarifying that. I have a bad habit. I tend to refer to the Bachelor's of Science in Respiratory Care as a BSRT, when really here in Florida, a Bachelor's in Respiratory, according to the State Department of Ed, is actually referred to as a Bachelor of Science in Cardiopulmonary Science. So it's actually the BSCS degree. I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't take another opportunity to thank the good folks at the Florida Society of Respiratory Care for all their help, especially in getting the word out. Speaking of getting the word out, I have been in touch with the AARC and the Coalition for Baccalaureate Graduate and Respiratory Therapy Education, who have been very gracious in offering whatever resources we may need in producing a white paper. I would also mention that if there's anybody out there who would like to be involved in producing the white paper, we would love to have it. So while we have a core group that's sort of volunteered to work on the white paper, I want to mention that all are welcome, especially those for whom working on something like this may be a feather in your professional cap. So if you're an educator who feels you might benefit from being involved in something like this, please feel free to email. So with all the housekeeping out of the way, I just want to kind of update those that weren't able to attend the last meeting. I want to briefly update you where we are. Really, the discussion centered around sort of 3 approaches toward advancing the baccalaureate. One was a market-driven option, which we can talk more about. One was basically tiered licensure, where we would ask that another level of licensure be added to licensure here in Florida. So you would have CRTs, for lack of a better term, ASRTs, and then you would create a new level called BSRTs, with the hope being that somebody would typically go to a 2-year program, get their ASRT, get out there, get working, get clinical experience, and then hopefully in a relatively short period of time, continue their education, obtain their BSRT, and then apply to the state for increased licensure. And then we also discussed a plan similar to what's being proposed in New York State, that would be the BSRT is entry level. For those of you that were at the meeting, did I do a fair job capturing that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the market-driven option, because when I went back and I listened to the recording and everything, it just seemed like we didn't discuss that enough, or maybe we weren't specific enough. So I'd like to kind of throw this out to the managers out there. When we use that term, what would that entail for you folks?
Hi, this is Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Similarly to what we did with the registered respiratory therapists, I know a number of those on the call and others have done the same here at Sarasota Memorial, we've only hired registered respiratory therapists for a number of years, for over a decade, and 100% of our staff is RRT. This we did without a change in the licensure status. Similarly, through our career ladder that we're doing now, we offer substantive increases to salaries for BSRT, and we're hiring preferentially BSRTs. So I could see a pathway to this simply by hospitals and other employers preferring the BSRT over other credentialed therapists.
Right, this is Kathy Rosansky again at Baptist Medical Center throughout the Baptist Health System, which is a 5-hospital system. We also pay a differential for our BSRT. Again, that's something that we promote. There's not a salary difference per se, but it is that differential. So that's something that we pursue. And again, we promote the bachelor degree. But again, it's not a substantial salary adjustment, just that differential, much like the nursing world with bachelor and masters.
And this is Dr. Berlin from Advent Health. So Advent Health Central Florida Division does hire in at a higher rate of pay for baccalaureate prepared respiratory therapists. And in addition, it helps give them a leg up on our professional clinical ladder as well. Our job descriptions for promotion are tiers going into supervision, education, and management tiers also requires a minimum of a baccalaureate beyond the shift supervisor level.
This is Dan Ayers from St. Joe's. And at Baycare, we pay an additional, it's a salary increase. It is not a different job description. It's just if you have a bachelor's degree, you get an increase in pay when you hire on. However, and we do prefer the bachelor's degree program. In fact, we're pursuing that. I would like to see a separate job description for that in our system, and I think we're going to have to move towards that. The issue we have is the lab feature. You have to have a supervisory level at the lab level, and so many hours of science in a baccalaureate type degree, and or else, and we're finding that we don't have enough people right now. We did in the past, but with the COVID and people moving around, we're lacking that to do our competency checkoffs. So it's valuable to us. So anyways, we can move there just doesn't always seem to see that value at the team member level, we encourage them and we pay for tuition reimbursement, things like that. But any way that we can encourage at the student level to realize that this is what you're going to need as you move forward, because we're finding more. And then on top of it, as we move forward, we need a certain percentage of our team, and we're nowhere near that, to at some point that would have to be at a federal level to proposition to have a change in CMS funding and all that kind of stuff. But that's a whole nother argument. But yeah, any way we can move forward with moving back, enticing people to get a bachelor's degree would be great.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm gonna say something off the wall, which is not unusual for me. Does anybody else ever get the sense that for some time here in Florida, and this may not be the case anymore, there was sort of this catch-22 between educators and employers, where employers would say to educators, you need to produce more BSRT level grads, you need to produce more BSRT programs. And then educators would say back, well, listen, we can't do that until you pay more. I always had the sense that was the case. And correct me if I'm wrong, that is is no longer the case, right? That you certainly have enough BSRT level programs here in Florida. I think at last count, there were 11 colleges that offered the BSRT or are proposing to. And from what you guys are saying, there are more and more places that are incentivizing the baccalaureate. So that old argument is no longer the case, or is that just wishful thinking on my part?
Well, Steve, this is Tom. I can tell you that that's kind of a lame argument. So, I mean, for the education institutions to say we're not going to do it until industry starts paying more, that makes no sense to me whatsoever. The institutions, quite frankly, don't want to do it because they stand to risk grant funding. And so it's the bottom line that has to be overcome. In addition, they're just afraid of the added expenses, in my opinion.
That's true. The other thing I would just add, you have an excellent point, Tom. The other thing I would just add, these are questions the state asks when you go to apply for a new program. So
In
when
5
you fill out an
more miles,
application-
turn left
Yeah.
onto Red.
I'm sorry?
I
I'm
think
sorry,
it was inadvertent.
Oh, okay.
but I did to have an input. This is Leah Carlson. I wanted to bring up about that. We brought it up at our advisory committee meeting, probably 4 or 5 years ago, being able to add a bachelor's level program. And our associate VP specifically asked the question if it would change the ability for students to get jobs. And the answer by our advisory committee was no. They are hiring associate level RRTs, and that's what they want, RRTs. And so right there, she said that they weren't going to pursue an application through the state to get it. So we do have to have something from the market. It may not be a pay raise, but it has to be something that actually gets our administration, I know at our school, to buy in.
Well, Leah, this is Tom once again. I have been on my soapbox about this for years at our Central Florida Advisory Council meetings. And the fact of the matter is there is just not enough time in an associate's degree curriculum to prepare a respiratory therapist for what I need them to do in the hospital. When we bring them in, we are looking at probably another 4 to 6 months until they're competent to do what we need to do at a minimum. And it's just, they are coming in, the schools are doing the best they can, don't get me wrong, with the amount of time, the amount of hours that they're allotted. But because the profession now is becoming so complex that what is getting squeezed out are, in my opinion, the general education, the well-rounded education requirements of soft and hard math skills, mathematics, and particular communication and critical thinking skills that are typically not provided in the technical portion of the programs. So that alone, to me, makes the argument that we need to go to a higher baseline education level. Even aside from all the federal government requirements of a learned profession.
And the lab requirements, I mean, I know CAPS, but I'm pretty sure Joint Commission is not that far behind what CAPS is requiring. Am I wrong on that? And I mean, you have to run a lab, the only people that can check you off annually for your competencies has to be somebody at a bachelor's degree level.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's becoming like that. There's no way around that other than we could lose our abilities to run a lab, which sounds like, okay, well, that's not their responsibility, the schooling or whatever. But nowadays, it's just not realistic because they need stat labs and the laboratory is not prepared. Maybe at a smaller place, but at most larger institutions, they just cannot meet even come close to meeting the demands that a bedside respiratory therapist can to do any of the stat labs. Most places don't even just do blood gases anymore. They're doing electrolytes, they're doing metabolites, all those things in the emergency room. And those are, services we have to provide. So, yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot more going on than even just increasing our charges or those types of things.
And that is a challenge, Dan, because it is not just a baccalaureate degree. It's got to be a Bachelor of Science degree in one of either laboratory sciences, respiratory care, or cardiopulmonary sciences for arterial blood gas labs, et cetera.
Absolutely. And that's what I brought up at the last meeting. You know, if we're going to move forward with this, I would really entertain language that stipulates it has to be and I get it wrong too, Steve. What is, it's the BSCS, I think they call it here. But, you know, it has to be that cardiopulmonary degree with so many, I think it's 3 years of hard science.
This isn't, this isn't Steve.
Sharon Shenton had her hand raised, and I want to give her the floor if I may.
I was just thinking that, you know, we are for years are talking about how can the community colleges step up to the plate and develop bachelor's degrees and meet, you know, and that meet the requirements of what we need. It feels like we're missing a part of the conversation. Is like, how do we re-engage the state universities to step up and get re-involved in respiratory care education? It feels like a lot of the constraints we talk about are what can I know we're not called community colleges anymore. What can a state college do? And all of us in the education system have worked really hard to try to, you know, work into the system and build a bachelor's degree that works. But the real problem in Florida, in my opinion, is that we don't have a state university partner for not just a bachelor's degree, but to move towards the master's degree. So I know that's a bigger issue type question, but that, to me, that keeps resounding. It's like we keep trying to make the community colleges fit the role of what we really need a state university partner to do. And so I would love to see that conversation take place somewhere in the future. You know, if it's not UCF, I wish it was UCF. You know, what about USF? What about, you know, looking at some state university partners to achieve the goals that we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, that's a good point, Sharon. We have FAMU, but I think that's it.
Misty, I'm going to give Misty the floor.
I just wanted to bring this back up since we're talking about the lab feature part of the bachelor degree. And I brought it up last time because Halifax was going under cap inspection, and just a degree advancement bachelor degree is not going to cut it. You have to have 32 hours of science credits, and we can't fit that into our new bachelor's program. So that might not even be acceptable. Like we don't have anywhere to put these extra sciences plus the requirements of this degree advancement by COARC of what they're expecting for this degree advancement. We don't have anywhere to put this physics and extra science courses that they would need to have those 32 hardcore science courses. So the only option that we've come up with that we're trying to throw around is creating a certificate.
Right. I agree with you, Misty, that if I look at that, in those cases where we can't reach that type of math, we're going to have to make up the difference with advanced technical certificates. I would just add, while we're on the subject of advanced technical certificates, those that may be listening out there in Zoom land, if we could also use technical certificates for those that currently practicing clinicians who have degrees in the field other than respiratory care that need to convert that to a true BSRT degree, that could also be accomplished for technical certificates. And I'm often asked, if I have a degree in history, do I have to go back for a whole nother 4-year degree? And the answer is very likely not.
I was looking around on the CLIA website and looking at some of the FAQs and stuff, and I found some information that indicated that nursing science or nursing courses are considered biological sciences. So I was wondering if one approach is, why aren't respiratory care courses also considered biological science if nursing can be? Is that something that we talked about at all?
CAP's not going by CLIA anymore. They're only going by
I see.
CMS and their requirements. This was something that just came up like right before the last meeting that we had.
I got you.
I had brought it up because we're developing our program and there's nowhere that we can fit this extra science in. So the only thing that we can think of is possibly create a certificate on top of the BS in cardiopulmonary science that the students would get.
Well, the upper division science programs in a bachelor's program, for example, at Valencia's includes additional sciences or could include additional sciences. Perhaps there could be a concentration that's maybe like a pre-med concentration or something that adds some additional sciences. But I was looking, I had our advisor analyze a Valencia student if they were to come in through AS through our BS, and they would wind up with 32 science credits. If you could count pathophysiologic mechanisms and courses like that. So I mean, to me, the question is, what is science? Is pharmacology science? Is pathophysiology science? So if you can count those, which are not just respiratory therapeutic courses, then a model similar to Valencia's does have sufficient sciences.
Which we would as well if they will take those, but they're not saying they'll take those. They were giving us examples of like physics and biology and things like that. So
I think that could be challenged, honestly.
I'm just bringing it up because Halifax is hiring a consultation team to do their ABGs now because they don't have enough people with the bachelor's in cardiopulmonary science that has enough science.
Send them to my program.
I've got one comment to go back to Leah's comment about the increasing their program at Santa Fe to a bachelor's program. I don't discount anything that Dan or Tom you said about the need for the bachelor's piece, but I think really what came from their administration and as a question to this group is how many of our facilities are willing to go to hiring just BSRTs or bachelor's level RTs, because their administration's standpoint was if everybody's still going to hire an associate's level RT, why do they need to move forward?
That's a chicken and egg argument there, Tom.
No, not an argument. It was just a comment for discussion.
Yeah, it's also kind of a cop out.
Yeah, the state, however, I did want to point out when you apply for a program with the state, these are questions the state asks. In your market, how much more will a student with this degree make versus a student without that degree? And those can be difficult questions to answer. So while I understand what you're saying, Tom, it's just, when you're coming up with a new program, you're trying to get the state to approve it, which is a long, tiresome process. And if they're asking questions like this, the more help you can give us, the easier the job becomes.
Yeah, and I think as far as it goes for facilities, as we move forward toward, that's the level of expectation. If there's only one facility in a market, then that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge for those schools to get that application through.
Now, it's my understanding, Steve, aren't we pushing for, there would still be the associate's degree? Isn't it just a tiered, it's a tiered licensure situation, right? Because I mean, I think we've already kind of established, I mean, we're all short-staffed. There's no way I can say, be able to sell at this point in time, oh, we're only going to hire bachelor's degree. I mean, I have a hard time getting, we're looking at CRTs again at this point at some time, on nights. So.
No, I agree that the last time we spoke at the last meeting, and again, there were several people that weren't here, the tiered, there were a couple things were being proposed. There was a lot of support behind a market-driven option and tiered licensure, where students would have the AS license, then go back, get the BSRT, and then get the BSRT license. Now, I keep using the term pillars, that each option is a pillar. It may be more accurate to say that this is actually a stairway, that perhaps we would start by recommending that, listen, let's look at a market-driven option, encourage all facilities to the fullest extent allowed by their budget and staffing to do everything they can to incentivize and promote the baccalaureate. At the same time, push for tiered licensure here in Florida, with eventually, especially taking into account what happens in the national market, look to go to the BSRT as entry level and take it, recommend a stair step approach. Because realistically, how long is tiered licensure going to take? I think we're talking years, not months. That's how I understood the last meeting. Is there anybody that would like to add to that? Do you think I've got an accurate handle on that?
I think Tom has his hand
I
up.
think you described what we talked about just fine there, that it would be a tiered system. And then over time, like you said, if it allots down the future, just make it entry level.
Tom, you have your hand. I want to recognize Tom Berlin.
Yeah, just real quick, Steve. Could you please elaborate on what you mean by a technical certificate? That term doesn't really mean anything to me.
Sure. In the state of Florida, you can put together, I believe it has to be at least 10 credits to meet any market-driven need. So the situation that was being discussed earlier, where you have people that have baccalaureate degrees, but they don't have enough hard science credits to meet a CAP or a CLIA requirement, a state on very short notice can put together a college, on very short notice can put together a technical certificate to just offer those classes to meet that individual industry requirement. I've been working, just to give you a sense, Tom, I've been working on an application for a baccalaureate program for years. I had 2 certificates approved in less than a month. Because if you go to the state and say, listen, here's the need, this is how I'm going to meet it, these are the courses I'm going to use, they look on that very favorably. They also incentivize it. And please correct me if I'm wrong, last I checked, certain technical certificates were $1,000 from the state to the college per student. So the state really financially incentivizes these in the state college system. Sharon, Misty, do you want to kind of add to that or anything that I missed?
I mean, you said it right. Like you can get a technical certificate done really quickly. We've been working on our bachelor's already for about a year. It's probably not going to even start until the next fall. So fall 23. So it takes like 2 years just to get that whole process through. And then if we add the technical certificate with it, or as an option for people to do, then that would give the extra hard sciences so that those people would qualify for lab.
Right.
So what would the advanced technical certificate be in?
It would be in CAP CLIA requirements for blood gas labs.
A respiratory respiratory lab
Respiratory
sciences
something
or
like
something.
that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great option. I know we talked about it last time. It's really, and they do that in a lot of professions.
But they wouldn't have a bachelor's degree. An ATC is generally between an AS and a bachelor's degree.
Well, these
No,
are
this
for
is for
people that have
bachelor's.
like a BS in marketing, say, and then they have some sciences in their associate's degree. And this is just to cap off their sciences so that they meet the science requirement. Is that my understanding of it, Steve?
Yeah.
It could be for a bachelor of BSRT or cardiopulmonary science student as well that doesn't have enough sciences due to taking AAAS, their bachelor's, and not having enough hard science. And they can still take this, or like they said, any science degree and add the extra sciences to have that hard science to be able to qualify for CMS.
Well, if a therapist has a bachelor's degree and just needs some more sciences, they could just take some more sciences without going through an ATC, correct?
They could. They absolutely could, Sharon. The only thing is the schools wouldn't be reimbursed by the state. If schools package that as a certificate and market it as a certificate, they would obtain additional state reimbursement.
And the student and the employer, this makes it like structured, so you can say this is where you need to go to get this done. Otherwise, they're hunting around, and then they have to come back every single time they take a class to say, is this going to be approved? Is this right? Yeah.
See, I can see that the departments want therapists to have that, but I don't see the motivation for therapists to do that, honestly. Do they care that your department needs someone to do their competency testing? I mean, is that something that they have a goal that's something they're going to be able to do as a therapist? I just wonder who would be motivated to get an ATC in science? Is it in science courses or what is?
Well,
it?
what we could do is as for the market, you know, we can say, okay, all our charge therapists have to be able to be lab supervisory level and have enough science to be able to check off their people on their shift. And that's a requirement. And we pay for this certificate for them to go. So there's things like that where we can do, or we can say this is a pay for skill or whatever, you know, however your department incentivizes the team members to get that done, because otherwise, yeah, you lose, like hospitals, if they lose their lab abilities to run a lab, it's a huge financial burden on the department. There's, you know, it's a huge productivity loss, there's a loss of employees. It's a big change.
So let me ask the question, if we still had our lab licenses, which we all used to have, our blood gas licenses in addition to our respiratory care license, then would that take care of the situation?
I don't think those people had enough science that is now required. No, those, because most of those people, I think some of them were CRTs from what I remember back in the day. So it would have to be only people would, you know, that probably would have had to need to been updated to require the sciences that are necessary. But yeah, you could do a separate license, sure.
In our current practice act, I believe we felt that lab license was unnecessary because our current practice act licensed us to do diagnostic testing. You know, so I just wonder, you know, about challenging the requirement. You know, if you have a bachelor's degree and you're a licensed respiratory therapist, you should have sufficient credentials to, you know, run competencies. I just wonder if there's a way to challenge that.
It would be interesting if to find out if somebody hasn't done that with CAP already.
Yeah.
Halifax is trying to. That's all I can tell you. Because it's not CLIA anymore. They have to go by CMS requirements.
Well, it may be similar to other types of inspections where it's individual with whoever is looking at the institution. I'm going to do more research on the CMS site and stuff, but
it's been a thing for quite a few years now. I mean, it's definitely been a conversation, a huge piece of conversation. Yeah, it's very frustrating. And it seemed to be getting stricter, not looser.
Correct.
Is there anything else that anybody wanted to add before we move on to sort of the next topic of discussion?
You mean there's more?
I'm afraid so. I'll try to make it quick and painless. What I did, and I realize this is very much a rough draft, I took the 3 main steps. I listed the core things that we wanted them to achieve and just check off essentially boxes. So you have the market-driven approach, tiered licensure, BSRT as entry level. Again, for purposes of a white paper, it might be wise to review these or present these as a stepped approach without offering any specific timelines. But the key things that we identified in our last meeting is items that had to be met is that it wouldn't decrease the number of available practitioners. So a market-driven approach and tiered licensure wouldn't stop the flow of new grads out of programs. The market-driven approach combined with the tier licensure would allow programs to maintain their Perkins funding. For those that weren't at the last meeting, many, perhaps most RT programs rely on Perkins grants to buy equipment, sometimes tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to fund labs. So it's a huge thing for AS programs. And if there's any way that can be preserved, at least for the time being, that's something we would want to do. I looked at what would avoid changes in the Practices Act and what would protect ASRT programs. What other, I guess I have 2 questions. Does anybody look at this and say, no, that's not accurate? Or can we all agree, geez, that pretty much captures it? And I'm going to recognize Nancy Latimer.
With the state college system, my understanding is that we will probably never be allowed to have BS and cardiopulmonary sciences as entry level. Because it's a state, 2-year kind of system. And that would be reserved for the university levels.
So where and please correct me if I'm wrong here, the last I heard on that if the profession went to the BSRT as entry level, so let's say there was a national degree, that those programs could remain housed at the state college level. And I would defer to those with more expertise on that matter.
That isn't going to be in our lifetime because of the state's college systems, not only in Florida, but everywhere else in the nation. You're talking 30 years before that would go into effect.
Could well be. Could well be.
The other thing I wanted to mention, I put it in the chat, was in the minutes I noticed, and I just want to clarify, the minutes you said you had a ASRRT would be the tiered credential. And I'm assuming that's to, because the ASRT, the American Society for Radiologic Technologists, the ASRT is trademarked by them.
I wish I could honestly say I was that quick.
I thought it was genius. I was
I've disappointed us both, Nancy. I just randomly picked that, for lack of a better term, and had no such forethought.
But the ASRT is a trademarked name, and we would not be able to use that.
Okay, so we'd have to call it ASA or ASRRT or something like that.
Yeah, their national board sued the MBRC back in the 70s and won for the use of RT. So we're not allowed to call ourselves RTs either, by the way. Those are their radiography technologists. And I only am up on all that because my husband is a former ASRT president and chairman of the board. So I got some information on that stuff.
That's the same argument I have with rapid response teams shortening to RRT. I have to throw the trademark out there for that.
Amen.
I want to recognize Misty Carlson.
So I think when I brought this up last time, we tried to go to the state to find out if we could do just a straight bachelor's instead of the 2+2. You can't do that in Florida at this point. But if Florida went to a bachelor's level, then they would have no choice but to let the schools switch the programs to a bachelor's.
Yeah, you'll be bucking the university system, and there's no way they're giving that up.
We have approval from UCF to do our program, and they would have to have all the universities would have to say that they would not want these programs. None of them want them now, so they're not going to take on all these in the future, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, so whatever your university that you're associated with, so USF or UCF, UCF, then when we did it, it was FAU. And of course, they have a medical school, so they don't want any part of us. So it was super easy. They're like, yeah, take it, it's yours. But like I said, it's not going to be in our lifetime. And the way I'm looking at this is just we're back to the 90s where, you had the distinction between CRT or CRTT, RRT. And I actually think it's a brilliant idea only because getting some of the students to come back to school and incentivizing all that comes in handy because there is a difference between having an AS degree and a BS degree. I mean, you spent a lot of time and effort and furthered your education. And so as long as the hospitals can pay a few dollars extra an hour for having it, I think it's a great idea. And we're moving forward, but using the model that we had in the 80s and the 90s. That's the way I'm picturing this. And I think it's a great idea.
I want to recognize Sharon Shenton, please.
I just want to throw out another idea. It seems like I hear a lot of the state colleges, their biggest challenge seems to be that they can't have a BS in cardiopulmonary sciences, that it's a bachelor's of science in health sciences or a bachelor's in science and whatever they have. We have 3 BS cardiopulmonary science programs in the state, one at FAMU, one at Valencia, one at Southwest College. I was wondering if there's ever been any thought to have like a consortium approach to the BS and cardiopulmonary sciences, so multiple colleges could be associated with that degree. I know that nursing is doing that at Valencia with Seminole or another college, and it's just that they're out there. I know when I was in New Jersey, there were consortiums that were multiple colleges. So if if all colleges can't get a BS in cardiopulmonary sciences, and we have 3 BS in cardiopulmonary sciences, maybe some thought for the future might be, can we have a consortium? So that students could possibly, get more sciences through one of those programs. Yes.
Karen, Palm Beach State College does have a bachelor's in cardiopulmonary sciences, and it was established 2 years ago.
Which, oh yeah, excuse me. So there's 4. Okay, so there's 4. So we have 4 in the state.
Ours will be.
Is it cardiopulmonary sciences?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe that's not a problem anymore. That's
Ours will be as well. But
okay, cool.
Sharon, I do feel you have an excellent point. Hillsborough and St. Petersburg College are having that type of discussion. That, hey, how many BSCS programs you need in Tampa Bay? Maybe the 2 schools could work together. So yeah, I think that's an excellent idea, and there, at least on this coast, there's been that type of discussion.
So if you are developing a BS in cardiopulmonary sciences, it would behoove you to make sure you have 32 credits by the time they graduate.
Yeah, no, I
you
agree
do.
completely. That's something you got to look at. Definitely got to look at. I want to recognize Tom Berlin, please.
Thank you, Steve. And the talk about tiered licensure is interesting, although I want to point out again that none of this can even be considered until we get rid of the CRT, RRT debacle, which in my view has to take place first.
Okay. What I was, I guess, envisioning, and I hope the group will correct me if I'm wrong, that this group produce a white paper laying out these options, and then we look at what we approach the state with. We look at opening up the Practices Act, going with no new CRTs, no new CRTs. I want to say it again for anybody that might be listening. The tier licensure, maybe the student exemption, and offering those all as separate white papers. And then that way, when we decide to open up the Practices Act, we have white papers on each individual issue.
Yeah, the FSRC has a current white paper on sunsetting the CRT licensure level.
And this would be, the purpose of this group is to issue a second white paper on solutions to the BSRT, leaning toward what we have here. And then probably another thing is, I think Dan Ayers mentioned this, we got to take a look at perhaps another white paper on student exemption, but that's probably a different group and everything like that. I want to recognize Timber Shippey, please.
Hi, I just have been listening and taking it all in. I've worked at a lot of hospitals, and I just read some of the comments, like they would take someone with a BS over an RT, and I agree. I do agree with higher education, but if we cut out like all the CRTs and all the RTs, like we are losing so much wealth of knowledge. Like just because they have a BS and they come right out of college doesn't mean they're going to be smarter. I think you still need that clinical setting. You still need to be in the hospital. You still need the older therapists teaching you. I just felt like we were I felt like people were saying that this is the only way to go. Like what happens to everybody else?
Timber, we didn't, the proposal is that all CRTs would be grandfathered. We just wouldn't, at a certain cutoff date at some point in the future, the state would not allow any more licensed CRTs. But anyone currently licensed and maintaining that license as a CRT could continue to practice as long as they maintain that active license.
Okay, thank you, because I was very confused. I'm like, I've learned from some of the best CRTs.
Yeah, there's no question of the value there. That's not the point. The point is to clear up the confusion and the lack of clarity on our 2-tiered licensure system. And the problem lies essentially with the ARC and MBRC for not driving it, but so
Yeah.
at the state level.
Yeah, and Timber, the bottom line is, yeah, right now especially, it's like do no harm. We're not looking at limiting or marginalizing anyone. It's more like in the future and moving the degrees further up so that we can meet the future and, you know, that kind of thing. And eventually, yeah, standardizing, just going along with the thing that the AR or the MBRC is doing with one test and hopefully moving towards just the RRT in the future.
No, I do agree with that with the, you know, and I do believe the bachelor's program is amazing, but like my question is like, what other education are we going to do hands-on to get those students right out of school, even with a bachelor's, to be stronger respiratory therapists? Is there going to be more clinical setting? Usually with a bachelor's, they're not. So that was my other question.
With a tiered approach, Timber, what would happen is students would graduate from an AS program as they always have, obtain employment in the field and continue to gain clinical experience and expertise and tuition reimbursement, and then go back over time and get the additional degree. And once they attain the additional degree, they could apply for additional licensure. Nothing would change for the CRT or the ASRRT. I want to take a minute as our time grows short and ask a question of the group. Is there enough agreement on what we have here that we can start working on a white paper and reconvene when the draft of the white paper is done? Or do you feel that we're still of different minds enough that we should continue to debate the issue? So what I'm asking is, do you want to continue to meet every month, or are we at the point where, listen, we've kind of hammered out at least the basis of a proposal? Should we reduce that proposal to a rough draft of a white paper and reconvene 90, 120 days down the road from now to review a white paper and take the discussion from there? Or do you think it would be wise to continue to meet and hold off on the white paper? What are everybody's thoughts on that now? How many of you support the market-driven approach to the tiered licensure? You feel you could get behind that if it was well presented in a white paper?
I just, I'll have to be honest, I mean, I think in when the timing is right, but I'm nowhere near that.
Okay.
That I could even suggest that we were only going to hire bachelor's degree.
No, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, Dan, we'd be doing this for a few years down the road. So now is to lay the groundwork and to prepare and have a cohesive argument.
Would you guys
while understanding that the market is on its ear right now, and we obviously can't cut our nose to spite our face.
Yeah, definitely in the future. I mean, I could see moving in that direction, but I just feel like there's such a, well, that's the other thing. Did we see data? How many bachelor's degree therapists are even out there? I think the number is not anywhere near 50%, is it?
No, it's about 25 last we checked. Would the group prefer that for right now, we held off on the market-driven approach and just look at a white paper regarding tiered licensure? Is there enough understandable discomfort to hold off on the market-driven approach and just produce a white paper looking at tiered license? And you could, and keep in mind, I'm talking about a draft, that if you decide, no, let's go back and add market-driven, we could certainly do so.
Yeah, I would be in favor of teasing that out.
And maybe use the chat to kind of voice your vote if you'd like. That basically what's on the table is being proposed is that the group form begin to produce a draft of a white paper recommending tiered licensure, reconvene it when that's done for review of this same committee, and we would take it from there. And at this time, we would not include the market-driven approach in the white paper, but we could do so at a later time, depending on the wishes of the group. So again, if you would,
I'm more comfortable with that, but.
Okay.
Steve, I can support that as well, but I also want to remind the group, part of the reason that we're looking at the the market-driven approach and the BSRT is to move the profession forward so that we're recognized as more than just a technical program.
Yes.
What about the option of just producing two I mean, I'm not, the one with just the tiered and then the one with, you can include the mark and see how that goes, and then the group can kind of decide which one's realistic or.
Good idea, Dan. That's a good idea. It might be easier from just a logistical standpoint for the group producing a white paper to produce a white paper on a single topic, to get everybody on board with the format and everything of that. And once the group's comfortable with that, we can look at, let's add this and
So Steve, did you mention that there are some other white papers that we can look at as examples?
yes, and I provided the group with the model of the California white paper. And the AERC is, I did want to mention that in the email I got from the AERC, they felt that should be used as a model. I want to real quickly in the remaining time we have, I want to recognize Dr. Furman, please.
Yeah, thanks. This is Tom Furman. Thanks, Steve. I had a question. You guys are certainly more in tune with how things are going. But when I hear talk about a tiered licensure, what I think about is, one, you have to go to the state, and the state has to change their law to allow what they're saying. And I'm worried that the state would sit there and say, okay, if this is a tiered licensure, we should have tiered, basically, practice habits and stuff, that the person at a quote lower tier can't do the same things that the person as at the upper tier. And right now, I am sure most of your places, your CRTs, if you have them, are doing basically the same thing RRTs do. You might be forcing that hospital to stop the CRTs from doing some things. I'm just worried this could be a can of worms at the state legislative level. I understand the rest of it, and it makes sense to me to have something like that. But I'm just a little worried about what you could be opening things up to. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, Tom, I tend to agree with that. I think our approach to the state really needs to be to simplify. And it's going to be a challenge just addressing the CRT issue as it already has with the Board of Respiratory Care and my many interactions with them about this subject. So we have to be very careful how we think this through. And I'm not convinced that tiered licensure is would be the way to go. But there's nothing wrong with fleshing out these ideas and putting it on paper so we can gain clarity.
In closing, I want to recognize Tony Lamoglia, who's been patiently waiting. And then I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to an end.
Thank you, Steve, and everybody. First of all, several white papers will be better because that will simplify and streamline the process. In other words, each white paper addressing just one issue, and then maybe at the beginning, in the introduction to a white papers state, this is part of several white papers that should be kept together before anybody makes their mind up about what's going on, and they can jump on board or not on how to influence further in our profession. So that was a great idea, Steve. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind is those two national boards to become an RRT. And I keep on repeating that that's getting a lot of people turned off from our profession. And how is that going to fit into the grander scheme of things with the CRT, the ASRT, and the BSRT, taking into consideration that there are BSRTs out there that only pass the CRT part and are working as CRTs, not as RRTs. So that's another issue that we need to somehow put into our list of considerations. Thank you.
I agree. And that's something that we could address perhaps best in a white paper. Dan, I want to make sure we've got a chance to get kind of the last word in, Dan. Did you have something? Or? Dan, you had your hand up. Is that still the case?
No, I think it was a thumbs up.
Okay. So the question still remains, please reply by the chat. Do you want me to get the group together and crank out the first of the white papers on tiered licensure, reconvene when that's done, or you want to meet again in 30 days? If you would kind of put your preference in the chat, I'll go ahead and close the meeting there. Okay.
Hey, Steve,
Yes.
this is Tom Furman. I just want to make a quick comment. I put it in the chat, but somebody made a comment before about the NBRC and COARC trying to decide what to do with the CRTs and everything. And I just want to remind everybody, as I posted in the chat room, is that the NBRC is basically legally obligated to offer a CRT as long as any state will accept that as licensure. If the NBRC did not offer that, it would be looked upon in some courtrooms as restraint of trade. I'm not saying the NBRC wants to keep the CRT by any means, but right now, until the states will not, when the states no longer accept it for licensure, then the NBRC can do something about it. But right now, they're kind of stuck legally in the middle of that. So they may not be in favor of keeping the CRT, but they can't get rid of it by themselves.
Excellent point, Dr. Furman. Thanks for bringing that up. Listen, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting now. I haven't done a final count, and I will, but just at first blush, it looks like the white paper group is in the majority. I will do a final count of that and go ahead and notify everybody by email with a copy of the recording and the minutes and everything like that. Let me close by thanking you all for being here. It was a great discussion, and I want to wish everybody a great weekend.
Thank you, Steve.
Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank
Goodbye,
you.
Jared.